should I lease a car or should I buy a car? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hey, I'm Jonathan Sewell Sales at Mitchell Mazda and Mitchell Lincoln on the Boulevard and Enterprise, and today we're talking about leasing versus buying. So this is something that I first suggested to the channel and the subscribers of the channel to see if we could break this down, and I've really been wanting to do this for a while. However, it can get pretty in-depth, pretty lengthy when you talk about leasing, buying, and then comparing the two and seeing what's best for you. And that's what I would say is most important before we jump into this, is you have to determine what's best for you. So let's get started with a big picture, bird's eye view out, and say that when you're looking at a car, there's three ways that you could drive that car. The first one is to pay cash, right? You could all just pay it all up front and be done with it. The second way is that you could finance it, so traditional finance. And I've got some other videos talking about some different options and things with that. But of course, when you're talking about traditional finance, you're talking about still buying the whole car. So let me do a little quick, and this isn't a Miata, but let me give you a quick sketch. All right, here it is. And this is not an actual car. So this is your vehicle here. When you're talking about purchasing, whether you pay cash or finance, you're talking about the whole car. All right, you're going to buy the whole car. You're going to own it. You're going to be an owner. When you're talking about leasing, if we were to call this 0 to 100, and let's just call it right here in the middle, 50%, 100%. When we talk about leasing, you're only paying, let's just say 50%, or the depreciation of the car. So you're not owning the whole car, you're not an owner, and so you're only going to be talking about paying this much money. And we'll break down a few examples in just a minute. So again, talking about traditional financing, you have a term, 24 months, usually not when you're purchasing unless it's a very low price, older car, 36 months, 48 months, 60 months, all in between. Some people go all the way out to 84 months or 96 months. Again, this is not the purpose of the video to talk about best practices for buying a vehicle or purchasing. We're talking about lease versus buy. So you have all these different terms that can go 5, 6, 7 years, even 8 years in some cases, and that's to stretch out that payment far enough. Of course, the longer you stretch it out, the more interest you pay, which again is this whole picture here. You're buying the whole car. When you're leasing, again, you're talking about this. Usually because you're only paying this portion, leases are generally shorter terms. So if this was a 6-year loan, leasing you're only going to pay this portion, or 36 months. So 36 months seems to be the magic term in most leases. So we'll refer to that and use that as kind of the typical term, is understanding that. So when we jump into the next step here of what is leasing, leasing is basically renting the vehicle, and what you're responsible to pay is a predetermined depreciation on the vehicle that you've chosen. So from the lease price to the residual value, which is a percentage of MSRP, when you're leasing new vehicles, I would not advise to lease used vehicles. But when you're leasing a new vehicle, you have a lease price, you have a residual value. So in this case, your lease price would be here, residual value be here. That 50% depreciation is, if it's a 50% depreciation, it could be 55, 65, 75, could be 45 the other way, whatever the situation is, but you're paying this much depreciation, okay? So plus interest, okay? We call that a lease factor or money factor. So there is a rate attached to this depreciation, okay? So you do not own the vehicle. So in most cases, you have to carry a little bit of higher liability because you're just driving it. And basically that depreciation is based on your mileage. So you can do a very low mileage lease, 10,000, 12,000, 15,000. Most of your leasing is based on that 15,000 mile residual, and then you get credits or more percentage on the residual to do less mileage, or if you want to add miles, like you need 20,000 miles a year or 30,000 miles a year, you can still lease in that situation as well. Now, I'm speaking mostly as leasing as a new car dealer or as the manufacturer. There are tons and tons and hundreds of leasing companies with automobiles that specifically target businesses because, and we'll talk about this later, but a lot of businesses lease vehicles just to use them for that amount of time, for that mileage, and be done. So there's a lot of leasing companies out there, but I'm speaking specifically from the manufacturer or from a franchise dealer to the consumer when I refer to these leases. Okay? So leasing is a good option for most people. So let's talk about how leasing works. And I've talked about giving an example here. Let's see if I can jot down a few quick things here. So when you rent the miles, let's just say that we're talking about 12,000 miles a year, which equals 36,000 miles, and we're talking about a 36-month lease. And let's say, for simple math, that we're talking about a $30,000 car, and it is a 50% residual. So what we're actually paying here is $15,000 plus the money factor. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about here. So we're doing a 36-month lease, 12,000 miles per year, which is 36,000 miles. And these two things we're going to figure to pay $15,000 on a $30,000 MSRP vehicle. Now, let's just say, because you can negotiate a lease price a little bit, sometimes there's other incentives, rebates, and things from the manufacturer, but let's just say that you negotiate, and again, I'm just going to, for the state of this, $29,500 is what your actual lease price you negotiated, which a lot of time you're talking about payment with leasing just because that's how things break down. So we're going to subtract the $15,000 residual. So we're having to deal with $14,500 plus the money factor, which we're not going to get into too much, divided by 36 months. 14,500 divided by 36 is 4,000, rounding up to 403 per month plus interest. All right, so real quickly how I did that, we negotiated a $29,500 lease price. Because we're figuring a 50% residual, that's $15,000 plus your money factor interest, of course, which is predetermined. And of course, there's some tax, which you pay on every payment. So it's a little bit less than paying overall tax, one of the benefits of leasing. And so that's $14,500. Hope you can see that, $14,500 plus a money factor divided by 36 months. It's a $403 per month plus interest plus tax payment. Okay, real simple, real easy math. Now, if I'm looking at a 36-month finance, a traditional finance on 60 or 72 months, that payment is going to be higher depending on the final interest rate, right? Because if we take $29,500 plus taxes and fees, let's just figure $1,000. It's going to be higher than that. Divide that by 60 months. That's at 0%. That's $508 before interest. So it's going to be about a $550. Interest is going to be, somewhere around the same on this lease. So yes, jumping into the benefits of leasing, you can usually get a little bit lower payment when you lease. Okay. So here's a few terms that we'll go over when we talk about leasing. We've already mentioned a few. So the money factor is basically your rate or rental factor, rental fee, or lease factor to figure an interest. It's usually a 0.000 of an interest rate instead of because of how it's calculated in the lease. Some manufacturers actually use interest rates, so it really just depends on the manufacturer or the leasing company Ford Motor Credit Corporation, Toyota Motor Credit, Mazda Financial, all these different things might have some different programs in place. The residual, again, is also known as the lease end value. And how these are predetermined is the leasing company contracts people to say, hey, what is this car going to be worth in 3 years, in 39 months, in 48 months, or 24 months, whatever that term is. And so you take the MSRP and you apply that percentage, and it's pretty close. So the idea of a lease is that you pay the depreciation, right? Going back to my Picasso artwork here, you pay the depreciation. So at the end of 36 months or the lease term, this portion left is about what they could wholesale it for, or it would bring at auction, right? Because the leasing company isn't collecting these cars and buying them to keep them. They're letting you rent them essentially to use the mileage, and then they can dispose of them that way, whether they sell them to dealers, maybe we buy them when you turn them in, whatever the case is, and then they go to an end user. So the leasing company's not wanting to keep those cars. So that lease end value is also what you can buy in a closed-end lease. We're talking about closed-end lease. I won't talk about open-end leasing. So on a closed-end lease end value is also what you can buy the car for at the end of the term. So at the end of 36 months, you've paid your lease payments. If you like that car enough to buy it, you can buy it from the leasing company, refinance it at your bank, pay cash for it, whatever the payoff is, but you will have to pay the addition of full taxes on that amount, which you hadn't paid in the lease payment. And you will have to communicate with them that you want to do that before the term's up. Okay? Capitalized cost. Capitalized cost, when I was talking about this $29,500, is what your lease price is, plus you maybe have an acquisition fee that goes to the leasing company. It's basically profit and some other things that they can use for other expenses, such as having people come out to inspect it at the end or picking it up. They also have some other fees, like a disposition fee at the end of the lease. Sometimes they waive those things. But $29,500 plus the acquisition fee, plus any other things that you add, like accessories or things that can be residualized, then that's residualized in the lease to determine the amount that you're going to pay. All right, so it's factored in there. Cap cost reduction or capitalized cost reduction would be any down payment or trade equity that would help lower this price. All right, so what we're going to do, and I'm going to show you on this sheet here so that we can see it, just to match my example here. So 100% is $30,000. So 50% is $15,000. We have a $29,500, and just keep it simple. And we're going to put no money down. And we're going to say this is 0 months, 36 months, and this will be 72 months, just for... All right, so $29,500 is our lease price. We're figuring off of $15,000. This capitalized cost and adjusted capitalized cost is going to figure against this depreciation amount and that residual value. So essentially how that works is you subtract the residual value, and then you can figure out on 36 months, then you can add taxes per month per that payment, and also interest, and that would determine your payment. Now again, I'm not trying to get, it's actually a little over my head, I'm not trying to get too big into the calculating of payments, just trying to help you understand leasing a little bit more. Okay, let's jump into, and I apologize for talking so fast, I'm just trying to cram a lot of information into this video, and I don't want to be involved for your sake of watching it. I'm trying to break this up, and I will have some chapters below if you're watching on a computer that you can click through to these different topics. I hope that helps as well. All right, so we've talked about the 3 ways to drive a vehicle: purchase options, cash, traditional finance, or leasing. And leasing is just another way to finance a car. Still involves payments, down payments, trade-in, things like that. Then we talked about what is leasing. Then we talked about a little bit about how it works, how those payments are calculated. Before we jump into benefits, though, I think it's important because I kind of skipped over this. Now, when you're talking about a trade-in, people can trade a vehicle when they lease a vehicle. Here's the situation, goods and bads. You can have a lower payment as a lease. However, if you trade a vehicle with negative equity, and what that means is that what your vehicle's worth, you owe more than that. That negative equity is going to get factored into this 29.5 situation of your capitalized cost, and it's only on 36 months, so it's going to be a higher payment in most cases than a finance because you're not stretching that negative equity out over the full term. So keep that in mind. The upside to that, jumping ahead a little bit about benefits, is that if you committed to paying that higher payment in 36 months, at the end, you're done. You don't have any more negative equity to roll over. You can turn this car in and be done with it, okay? Also, if you don't owe any money on the vehicle and you trade it in, or if you have positive equity, you can use the equity as a capitalized cost reduction to lower the amount or this portion of the price of the car, which lowers your payment, just like a traditional finance, okay? The only thing to keep in mind is that when you're talking about a lease, you're talking about this depreciation amount. Whatever, from the lease price to the residual or lease-in value, 50% in our example here. So if you put $5,000 down, it's taking the $5,000 out of here. At the end of the lease, you're still going to owe the same thing. Okay, so even if you put a lot of money down, or even if you paid a one-pay lease, at the end of the term, you're still going to owe this fixed amount. And yes, I just threw that out there for the first time. They do have options for one-pay leases. Usually that's an alternative to cash. So instead of paying $30,000 for this car, you can pay $15,000 plus a little bit of interest and the monthly taxes and drive it for 3 years. So you can make one payment, drive it for 3 years, then turn it in, and you have some options. So that might be a good benefit for some because instead of spending the whole $30,000, you're only spending half of that money. And usually on one-pay leases, they do reduce the interest because you're giving it to them all up front. So they do give you some credits on interest. And you still have options when you do that as well. You can trade the lease. You can trade in a lease, whether it's a one-pay or a traditional lease. However, again, the lease was designed to go 3 years or whatever the term of the payments are. So at the end of that 3 years, you're supposed to theoretically be even, what the vehicle's worth and what you owe on it, the lease-in value. That's what the leasing company's counting on and figuring on. But if you trade earlier, you may actually, owe more than what your vehicle's worth. So it just depends. A lot of variables in that. Okay? All right. Now let's get to the benefits of leasing. Okay? So leasing is a great option for those who are going to drive low mileage. Why do I say that? Because there's less wear and tear on a vehicle in low mileage, and the lease payments are usually the best in a low mileage situation. Lincoln offers $7,500. Mazda offers $10,000 as their low option. And most people do $10,000 to $12,000 or whatever the situation is. But even 15,000 miles can be a low mileage situation. 20,000, 30,000 miles, you probably shouldn't lease unless you're a business and you can add those miles extra and prepay them so you don't have a higher bill at the end of the term. So someone who drives low mileage, if you want to keep a new vehicle more often, a lot of people do a 12,000 mile lease, 336 warranty on like a Mazda. So at the end of 3 years, 36,000 miles, they have options. They don't have any baggage. Another benefit of leasing, like, hey, what is my car worth? Do I owe more? Did I carry something in from the previous? At the end of a lease, you're done. So you've got options, and I'll talk about the options at the end of the lease in just a minute. Also, while you're leasing a vehicle, I mentioned that you have to keep a higher level of liability if you're in, and of course full coverage. So if you're in an accident, even if a $30,000 vehicle, if it's not totaled, if you have to repair half of that, $15,000 worth of damage, there's no penalties from the leasing company as long as your insurance fixes it to like new status. So you cannot turn a car in with dents, scratches, dings, windshields busted, no tires. That's called wear and tear, and they will assess fees for that. However, most leasing companies offer protective packages for wear and tear or wear care, so that you won't have to, you buy a certain amount when you pay for that. You can stretch it out over your lease payment, and it protects you from those things. But if you're in a serious accident and the front end's bashed in, your insurance has to fix it to where it's new and functional, and it has to be done to turn it in. But they don't say, hey, you had an accident, that value is less than what we figured, you have to pay the difference. No strings attached, right? As long as it's repaired, you're good. One of the benefits. The flip side of that, of course, if you go to trade a car after it's had a serious accident, it may be worth less than the average car mileage and age, just like it, because this one has a bad or poor vehicle history. So something to think about. Okay, also, I already mentioned a little bit, if you have negative equity, you can put that in the lease and be done with it. Or if you lease to begin with, you'll never have negative equity. All you have to do is say, hey, I want to be done, I want to trade cars in 3 years or get a new car in 3 years. You don't have to worry about the market. Although, right now the market's good, but in some cases, like if it was March, it may not be so good, right? Or whatever the situation was. So the market changes, but if you're in a lease, all that matters is that you're comfortable with the payment, and in 3 years, 2 years, whatever's remaining, you're done, right? You can turn it in, walk away. Also, one of the benefits of leasing is that when you come towards the end of your term, that leasing company wants to retain you as a customer. They know that you have options at the end of that term. So they're going to start giving you better incentives, throwing some money at you potentially, maybe a little bit of savings, so that you will go back to them and lease another vehicle. Okay, so you might actually get courted a little bit more than traditional, because you're 3 years, you're coming back around. They know when that term ends. If you're in a regular or traditional purchase, the manufacturer doesn't, or the finance company doesn't know when you're thinking about trading. They just know that, hey, this is your term. Also, a benefit of a lease is a shorter term or commitment. So if you don't want to stretch out 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you can just do 2, 3, or 4, whatever's comfortable for you, for your budget and for the car you're looking at, and know that, hey, I'm only on the hook for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, instead of 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So a lot of options there. The last thing I'll talk about as far as the benefits of leasing is that you do have two things. You do have an option to stay in warranty, of course, as I mentioned before. So if you want to keep in warranty, you never have to worry about paying a lot of maintenance. So not only do you have a lower payment on a lease, but you don't have to worry about maintaining those vehicles at 50, 60, 70, 80,000 miles. So you're pretty much just taking care of this situation. The last thing I want to talk about is the benefits of leasing, is that with businesses specifically, and even some individuals, you can lease a vehicle and write off 100% of it on your taxes, but check with your accountant first, okay? So you can write that off as a business expense. So theoretically, if you're getting credited for that payment, you're driving for free, right? If it pertains to your business. And that's why I said there's a lot of leasing companies out there that talk to businesses, and they facilitate this through dealerships or whatever the case is, and they lease used vehicles sometimes too, whatever the situation is, to fill your need, and you write that off as a business expense. So the flip side of that, of course, you may be familiar, like SUVs, you can write off up to $25,000. Some other vehicles up to $50,000 and things like that, and some of them all of it. So it depends on the weight or the gross vehicle weight rating of vehicles. On a lease, it doesn't matter the gross vehicle weight rating. You could lease a Mazda 3, not going to be towing anything, not going to be hauling anything, just going up and down the road, and you can write off that lease because you're using that vehicle for your business, and the mileage that you're buying or leasing in this case is used for business. Okay, even if it's your personal vehicle and you drive it home and stuff. But again, check with your accountant. I'm not a CPA. Okay, I know this was pretty fast and pretty quick. Again, I'm just trying to shrink all this information down. If you have more questions, of course, drop them below in the comments. I'll answer them the best I can. And I may have to do just a follow-up on this, in the next couple of days. Once I edit this video and check everything out, I may have left something off. So we'll come back and readdress it sometime next week. I know when I put this out to my channel, my subscribers, which I appreciate you guys, appreciate your input. They wanted it sooner than later, so I'm trying to make that happen. And but if there's anything else that I've overlooked, any other questions you have, always call or text me as well, 334-718-0504. and I will try to do a follow-up video if I've left out some gaps of things. So and as I'm sitting here, I really didn't compare it much to the purchase, the old lease versus buy, but I think most of us know about buying and the purchasing there, but I may have a shorter video come out and dive into that as well. So again, take advantage of the chapters below. Click through the stuff that maybe you had some questions on. You can go back and see that. Also, as always, I would appreciate a subscribe and ding that bell for notifications so that you see everything up and coming. A lot of 2021 information on Mazdas and some on Lincolns coming out. And got some new inventory coming in, so all types of stuff coming. I appreciate you, and I hope that this answered all your questions. And leasing's a good option, so definitely keep it in mind. I'm Jonathan Sewell Sales at Mitchell Mazda on the Boulevard in Enterprise and Mitchell Lincoln. And I'm always here for you for any automotive questions you have. And I really can't wait to see you in a new lease. Thanks.